I think one of the things that's been really important has been the adoption by Cabinet of the White Paper on Conservation and Biodiversity. And this is an attempt to domesticate the landmark Kunming-Montreal Protocol that was signed in the Conference on Biodiversity in December last year. What we understand about that protocol is it recognizes the need for 30% of the land and 30% of the sea to be placed under conservation by 2030. It recognizes the importance that communities living on the outskirts of protected areas should benefit from the existence of those protected areas, and also it recognizes what we call indigenous knowledge, which is that knowledge that guides the use of medicinal plants and herbs, and of course is so widely exploited in the pharmaceutical and beauty industry. Now, South Africa does accept that the science behind the so-called 30 by 30 principle, although at the moment we only have about 16% of the land and 16% of the sea under formal conservation, and we aim at 0.5% per annum to increase our conservation estate. We're also working very hard with communities so that those who are living in rural areas and on the outskirts of our national parks should increasingly benefit. In this regard, sandparks will be starting a whole range of private-public partnerships. There'll be 14 this year, and those private-public partnerships will result in the creation of about 2,000 jobs in small enterprises, where sandparks will be sourcing goods and services to the value of 75 million rand. Of course, climate change remains one of the major issues on the agenda, and I'm very pleased that the climate bill is being processed currently by the National Assembly. We have done a lot of work on putting in place what we call the mitigation and adaptation architecture, and that would include a methodology for the allocation of carbon budgets to industry. It would also include developing adaptation plans for all the district municipalities and also provinces, and seeking financial support for those particular plans to be implemented. What I think is also important to share with the public is that in our environmental assessment section, we have over 9,000 megawatts of renewable energy projects under consideration and 15 transmission and distribution projects. And we know that transmission remains one of the major inhibitors in getting more generation onto the grid. These projects are all being prioritized. We've managed to cut the decision-making time from 107 to 57 days, and we believe that it is still possible within these tight time frames to get quality decisions. Obviously, the environment assessment process requires two things. It requires what we call a basic assessment report, which looks at the environmental impacts of any project and what the mitigation measures would be. And then there is, of course, also the public participation process, where local communities affected by the development would have an opportunity to express their views and also to raise any concerns that they believe would be necessary if further mitigation measures are required.
And is this specifically for renewable energy projects, or does it also include emergency procurement, across the board?
It includes anything that would be regarded as a strategic infrastructure project, so it does include the emergency power procurement. We have taken further steps when it comes to solar power in particular. We have defined what we call renewable corridors, those corridors where best achievements can be achieved with either wind or solar. And we have out at the moment regulations for public comment, where we're saying that if these projects are in areas of low environmental sensitivity, then it would not be necessary to do the environmental assessment. The Climate Commission has done amazing work to adopt what we call the Just Transition Framework, and that was adopted by Cabinet last year. What we understand is that as the transition occurs, and I think it's very important to realize that the transition to net zero would be almost a 30-year project, we have to make sure that those communities who will be directly affected by the transition have particular attention in terms of investment in new forms of economic production, but also special focus on workers to ensure that either there's reskilling and retraining for new work opportunities, or of course involving some of those workers in new forms of ownership in new enterprises that might be developed. National Treasury has said in the public domain that they aim to finish their modelling by July. We are trying to see whether we can fit in with those timeframes, because we do understand that there is a sense of urgency in the public for some of these matters to be resolved speedily. We have an ongoing program of education which is run by our communications section. We do a lot of support work with schools, enhancing the curriculum offerings that would relate to biodiversity and climate change. We also obviously try to encourage students to take biology, natural sciences in particular as a subject, because we want to make sure that there's always a pipeline of young people who could study the sciences further at universities. And we also want to have public education about things like littering and waste management, because we're very concerned with the extent of illegal dumping in our country, and also environmental pollution, particularly the leaching of plastics from the environment into the sea. We are working very closely with municipalities, and I think in this financial year our focus is trying to get better landfill compliance. We've identified the top 40 landfills in the country in terms of waste volumes, and we want to make sure that those top 40 landfills have better compliance, but also we're looking at the whole issue of pricing of waste. So at the moment, the reason why we don't see as much recycling as we'd like to see is it's much cheaper to dump waste. So if we have to look at the pricing of landfilling and make some interventions there, we could probably see a situation where there would be greater appetite and greater interest in increasing recycling. In this regard, we have a special project that we're working with provinces on, and we hope that we will be able to crowd in private sector investment into this space. You know, there's something that we call extended producer responsibility. So we now have 4 waste streams, paper and packaging, e-waste, glass, metal and so on, where we would be saying to producers, you can't just produce a product which then finds its way into the environment. And we set up these extended producer responsibility schemes so that there is reclaiming of the product and recycling of the product. And this has been a very interesting journey that we've traveled. It also involves the formalization of informal waste pickers, and we have managed to, over the last year, divert several hundreds of millions of tons of waste from landfill. Of course, it's not enough yet. Our landfills are still all becoming full, but I think that last year is the first year of the economic functioning of the extended producer responsibility schemes did see a good uptake in that regard. I think that South Africa always works in the climate talks with the African group of negotiators. We see that Kenya is playing a very important role at the moment in the G7 in calling on developed countries to put their money where their mouths are and to support the climate transitions in developing countries. I think as a result of the African group of negotiators and also the non-aligned movement standing firm and standing together at COP27 in Egypt, we finally, after decades, saw a recognition of the loss and damage process. And of course we know that there are billions of dollars being lost in Africa all the time as a result of climate change, and we desperately need investment. And I think I would want to support President Ruto in his call that it's absolutely outrageous that African countries that are already heavily indebted should have to take on more debt to deal with climate change. And I very much support his call that those debts should be scrapped, and African countries should be allowed to combat climate change with the scarce resources that they have.